Committee will come to order. First, let me thank Commissioner Dong and our agency witnesses for all being here today. Together, your agencies occupy over half of GSA's expiring leased inventory. Today's hearing is the second step in our committee's GSA leasing initiative to save taxpayer dollars through right-sizing federal real estate. Step one was our July 15th roundtable, where GSA agreed to partner with our committee to improve office utilization, lock in low rental rates, and help agencies protect their employees from shrinking budgets. The purpose of today's hearing is threefold. One, to set expectations for what it will take to approve agency leases. Two, to learn what challenges agencies face to shrink their footprint and use long-term leases to get the best prices. And three, to learn how Congress can help GSA and the agencies achieve this goal. I believe we have a unique opportunity to work together and save a tremendous amount of taxpayer money. We have the same objective. The President wants to save money through real estate, and so does Congress. And it's not just me who sees this opportunity. Private sector tenants are taking advantage of the market and negotiating good long-term leases that cut their costs. So, what are these conditions? One, inventory turnover. Two, low interest rates. And three, a buyer's market. Let's take a closer look at these conditions. Inventory turnover. If you look at slide 1, you'll see almost 100 million square feet of GSA leases expire in 5 years. That is half of GSA's leased inventory. It is also the size of 32 of the new World Trade Center buildings in New York. Low interest rates. Financing costs are near historic lows. Literally billions of dollars of cheap and abundant capital are sitting on the sidelines waiting to help reshape the government's leased inventory. A buyer's market. Vacancy rates are high and rental rates are low in almost every market GSA has a presence. So what is the key to realizing this potential? Long-term leases of 10 years or more. Why is the length of the lease so important? At the most basic level, a longer lease lowers risk, lowers finance costs, and provides certainty for the landlord, who can then offer lower rents. If you look at slide 2, you will see GSA pays a 20% premium for short-term leases of 3 years or less compared to longer leases. But long-term leases do much more than just lower rental rates. They allow the government and the building owner to spread out the upfront costs of moving or reconfiguring space to accommodate more people. You can't do this with a short-term lease. For example, slide 3 shows 3 recent GSA leases. The three-year lease has a high rent and no concessions. The longer leases have lower rents and significant concessions. Unfortunately, slide 4 shows a significant amount of GSA leases are for 3 years or less, and that number is growing every year. There is clearly room for improving those numbers and saving taxpayer dollars. I also believe this is a win-win opportunity for everyone involved. Agencies can get new office space that better meets their needs, lowers their rent, and allows them to protect their staff from budget cuts. The taxpayer gets significant savings, which the President and the committee wants. In order to get these types of good deals, planning must start well in advance. In particular, prospectus-level leases require significant time to develop and execute. Tenant agencies need to embrace the President's savings goals and run competitive procurements to replace their leases. Today, I hope to hear how GSA and its tenant agencies are going to replace 100 million square feet of expiring space with long-term deals that improve utilization rates and lowers costs. Now, that is a lot of leases, and today's market opportunities is not going to last forever. What are the challenges or obstacles that prevent agencies from moving or reducing their real estate footprint? As chairman of the subcommittee, I am open to suggestions to simplify and speed up the leasing process so that taxpayers can benefit from this opportunity. This Congress, we have already saved $1 billion by simply reducing the size of prospectus-level lease replacements by up to 20%. Given the large number of expiring leases, the opportunity for additional savings is even larger. For example, if the agencies before us here today lower their lease replacement costs by 10% through a combination of space reduction and good long-term rates, we can save $3 billion over the next 10 years. That is a goal worth achieving, and I look forward to working with all of you to get it done. I now call on Ranking Member of the Subcommittee, Mr. Carson, for a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Barletta, and good morning to you, sir, and to the legendary, the incomparable Madam Eleanor Holmes Norton, and my good friend, Mr. Waltz, and my other colleagues, Dr. Schultz over there, my buddy. Subcommittee members and witnesses, welcome to today's hearing. We're following up essentially on last year's hearing when we examined the GSA's implementation of the administration's freeze on the federal footprint dealing with real estate policy. We heard details from several agencies about their work to reduce their real estate footprint. The agencies testified about their efforts to increase utilization rates, release unneeded property, and maintain their fiscal year 2012 real estate footprint. Today, we hope to get a better understanding of how agencies have executed their plans to maintain their baseline and how they plan to tackle expiring leases over the next 5 years within the Freeze the Footprint framework. According to GSA, over the next 5 years, over 100 million square feet of leases will expire, as Chairman Barletta mentioned. This is nearly 50% of their leases. As the federal government's landlord, GSA has a responsibility to work with other federal agencies to make good decisions that reflect both the will of the administration and Congress. The sheer volume of expiring leases over the next 5 years present a great opportunity to accelerate current efforts to reduce the federal footprint by cutting existing space requirements. In the wake of the Great Recession, we've watched the private industry downsize and become more efficient in utilizing space as a result of economic pressure. We expect federal agencies to do the same. Although the Freeze the Footprint policy currently applies only to office and warehouse space, we look forward to an update on broader efforts by GSA and other agencies beyond those two space classifications. If there is unneeded property that can be sold or redeveloped, it is very important for the committee to know about those properties. We also want to know about any assistance that we can offer these agencies in disposing of assets in their real estate portfolio. If an agency has a unique mission that needs to be impacted by your ability to freeze the footprint policy, we need to hear about them. We want GSA to help those agencies reduce their footprint, but we want them to be very smart about it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today.
Thank you, Mr. Carson. At this time, I'd like to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Schuster.
Thank you, Mr. Barletta, and I want to thank the subcommittee chairman for holding this hearing today, and also to thank Ms. Norton, who's really been a champion for utilizing these government spaces, saving money by doing things smarter, utilizing leases. So thank Ms. Norton for her, not just for the past couple of years, but for over a decade or so. She's been really pushing the issue, and I appreciate it greatly. I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today, especially Mr. Dong. Thank you for coming, and I'm very encouraged by what I hear from Mr. Dong. He's only been on the job about 4 months, so he can't fix it basically overnight. But again, I'm very encouraged by what we've in our discussions, but what I see him doing at the GSA, at the Public Building Service, and the time is ripe. I don't want to go all over the numbers which Mr. Barletta put out there so well, but this is a great opportunity for us to save $1 billion. It's a great opportunity for us to look at things and do them in a different way, and it's not something that we want to do. It's something we have to do. Just a couple days ago, I guess last week, the old post office building, groundbreaking with the Trumps coming in and redeveloping that. I understand that this is the first in a long period of time that we've done that. I guess the Hotel Monaco was the last one, to my knowledge. And so, again, we need to be looking at it and learn from this opportunity. Talking with the Trumps and their organization, what was good, what was bad. I know Mr. Barletta had a hearing in New York City on this issue, and Ivanka Trump testified, and she had some positives and she had some negatives. And again, we really need to learn from that as we move forward. And again, this billion-dollar savings, I believe, is the tip of the iceberg. There are many buildings around Washington, around the country, that we can have the private sector come in and utilize their money to rehab these buildings and put them back into use, which I think is something, as former Chairman Micah always stresses, being a former developer, on the opportunity we have to do this. So I'm very pleased that everybody's here today. I'm pleased that Mr. Carson and Mr. Barletta are exploring this and have been for many, many months now. So, again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome Mr. Webster. I'm very happy he's participating today. He has a big interest in what's going on, and I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Webster of Florida, who is a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, be permitted to participate in today's subcommittee hearing without objection. So ordered. On our panel today, we have Mr. Norman Dong, Commissioner, Public Building Service, General Service Administration. The Honorable Joyce A. Barr, Assistant Secretary for the Administration, Department of State. Mr. William Braces, Director of Washington Headquarters Service, Department of Defense. Mr. Michael H. Allen, Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Policy Management and Planning, Justice Management Division, Department of Justice. Mr. E.J. Holland, Jr., Assistant Secretary for Administration, Department of Health and Human Services. Mr. Jeffrey Orner, Chief Readiness Support Officer, Department of Homeland Security. And Mr. Peter Spencer, Deputy Commissioner of Budget, Finance, Quality, and Management, Social Security Administration. I ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record without objection. So ordered. Since your written testimony has been made a part of the record, the subcommittee would request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. Mr. Dong, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Barletta, Chairman Schuster, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Norman Dong, and I am the Commissioner of the Public Building Service at GSA. Our mission is to deliver the best value in real estate, acquisition, and technology services to government and to the American people. And when it comes to leasing, this means reducing costs and improving space delivery, which allows our partner agencies to focus their resources on core mission needs. I'd like to make 3 points this morning. First, GSA is focused on improving utilization throughout our portfolio, including in our leased space. We hold more than 375 million square feet of space, half of which is distributed among 9,000 leases across the country. And we're working with federal agencies to improve utilization throughout our owned and leased portfolios. And as a result, we've saved millions of dollars for our federal partners and for the American taxpayer. For example, in our fiscal year 14 prospectus level leases, GSA and our partner agencies proposed a 13% square footage reduction, going from 4.3 to 3.7 million square feet. We're doing this by helping federal agencies adopt new workplace arrangements and develop more mobile work strategies so more people can work in less space. Our client portfolio planning process helps agencies identify opportunities to co-locate and consolidate their space and right-size their inventories. And our Total Workplace program helps agencies address the costs of furniture, IT, and other upfront expenses that would otherwise prevent them from consolidating their space. Second, within our leasing program, our top priority is to reduce costs by improving long-range planning and broadening competition. As this committee has pointed out, GSA has an unprecedented opportunity to reduce the cost of federal real estate needs over the long term. More than 59% of GSA's leases will expire over the next 5 years, And this year, we have 10.7 million square feet of lease space expiring in the National Capital Region alone. We still can capitalize on favorable market conditions while average rates remain below their peak levels. As I mentioned earlier, our strategy for leasing requires better workload management and better improved long-range planning. We need to start working with agencies to develop requirements at least 36 months prior to lease expiration and to issue advertisements at least 18 months prior to expiration. And we'll be managing to these benchmarks to allow more time for competitive procurements that prevent costly holdovers and extensions. And at the same time, we must broaden delineated areas and simplify specialized requirements to generate greater competition and more favorable rates. In addition, GSA is moving away from the days of replacing expiring leases at a 1-for-1 ratio. Many of our fiscal year 14 prospectuses address 3 or more lease expirations. For example, we're seeking a lease for the Department of Justice that will replace 4 different expirations across the District of Columbia. And we're improving utilization from 184 square feet to just 130 square feet of office space per person through this process. By improving our upfront planning, taking a more flexible approach to delineated areas, and seeking longer-term lease arrangements, we're better positioning the federal government to take advantage of existing market conditions. My third point is this. While today's hearing is about our shared efforts to reduce leasing costs, GSA's first priority is to maximize the use of our federally owned inventory. Our fiscal Year 15 capital plan continues our work to consolidate agencies out of expensive leases and into federally owned space. In Detroit, for example, we're exercising an option to purchase a leased property on Michigan Avenue. This will allow GSA to renovate and backfill the building with agencies housed in 4 other leases. And this project will save the federal government about $11 million each year. GSA will also continue DHS consolidation at St. Elizabeth's. Last year, we opened a new headquarters building for the Coast Guard, and our fiscal year 15 budget request allows us to complete the infrastructure needed to fully occupy the center building complex and to move additional DHS components to St. Elizabeth's. And we're also maintaining our emphasis on large-scale consolidation projects. Our budget request this year reflects another $100 million to support agency efforts to co-locate, consolidate, and reduce their footprint. As with current year projects, we're showing how these upfront investments in agency consolidation will help reduce the real estate footprint and save money on agency leasing costs. These investments are absolutely central to GSA's and this committee's work to reduce leasing costs and to shrink the government's real estate footprint. We appreciate the fact that this committee approved 27 GSA prospectuses earlier this month. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Our work at GSA continues to benefit from our strong partnership with this committee. I look forward to continuing to work with you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Dong. Ms. Barr, you may proceed.
Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of this subcommittee. My name is Joyce Barr, and I am the Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Administration at the State Department. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. The State Department is a relatively small part of GSA's overall real estate holdings, accounting for approximately 2% of its nationwide portfolio. Approximately half of the domestic real estate that the department occupies is government-owned space, and and half is leased. Primarily in the metropolitan areas, State Department personnel are housed in about 150 facilities across the country. We are the sole tenant in roughly half of these locations. In the remainder, we are co-located with other federal organizations and other entities, mostly in federal space. In addition, under special legislative authority, we own 9 properties. We have a close relationship with the GSA to acquire space to meet our operational needs, and we depend on their expertise and experience in real property management to help us meet our mission requirements domestically. The Bureau of Administration, which I head, is responsible for defining and validating the department's evolving real estate requirements, coordinating with GSA in acquiring those facilities, and in managing the cost of those assets effectively. Our many missions shape and add complexity to our overall domestic real estate strategy. As a member of the national intelligence community, the department must meet certain operational security directives, which can increase costs under certain circumstances, such as when we move operations. Bureaus within the State Department are heavily integrated and must continually collaborate to effectively support the numerous policy and operational requirements of 275 U.S. embassies and consulates abroad. Therefore, we strive to co-locate bureaus together to foster that collaboration and, depending upon the need, place them as close as possible to headquarters in Foggy Bottom. At the same time, back office functions like passport production and financial activities are located in lower cost areas like Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or Charleston, South Carolina. Mail and shipping operations supporting overseas posts, along with the department's IT support, are also located outside of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. These operational factors have guided state's overall domestic real estate strategy for 25 years. We wholeheartedly endorse the goal of reducing leasing costs to the greatest extent possible. We recognize the need to minimize our real estate footprint and have been reducing our space allocation per person within our properties as opportunities rise. For example, GSA recently leased the old World Bank building on our behalf, enabling us to consolidate our Bureau of Consular Affairs from 5 separate locations. By incorporating space utilization benchmarks consistent with federal and private sector trends, we can now accommodate approximately 30% or 600 more personnel in the same space. The department has also made it a priority to operate facilities smartly by integrating energy conservation and environmental sustainability principles into our day-to-day activities. We have a great partnership with the GSA. They have been instrumental in helping us to identify the most suitable real estate opportunities to meet our long-term office space needs. On behalf of the American taxpayer, we practice good stewardship of the department's real estate assets, and we will continue our efforts to increase efficiencies in order to obtain the best value for each dollar spent. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Barr. Mr. Brazes, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the invitation to discuss the Department of Defense's leased space portfolio, particularly in the National Capital Region, but especially to express the Department of Defense's commitment to continue to substantially reduce our lease footprint and lease costs. I am Bill Brazes, Director of the Department of Defense Washington Headquarters Services. We're responsible for managing key government-owned facilities as well as DoD's leased facilities here in the National Capital Region. This portfolio includes the Pentagon Reservation, the Mark Center, a number of other smaller government-owned buildings, and in addition, the Department of Defense has currently, at the end of FY13, nearly 6.5 million square feet of lease space, secured by over 100 leases in 82 buildings here in the National Capital Region. Together, these facilities house over 70,000 defense personnel supporting the military departments and the defense agency missions. The current lease portfolio in the National Capital Region reflects substantial recent reductions that have occurred in our leased facilities since 2005. Under BRAC 2005, by the end of 2012, the Department of Defense has shed over 3 million square feet of our lease space inventory in the National Capital Region, primarily by relocating to government facilities on military installations, both within the NCR and outside of the NCR. Today, WHS is engaged heavily with the General Services Administration in our plans to continue to substantially reduce DoD's overall NCR lease space portfolio and our cost over the next 5 years. In the current program budget review, the Secretary of Defense has directed another 20% reduction from our 2013 NCR lease space levels, commensurate with reductions in DoD headquarters. DoD works in direct and strong partnership with the GSA to strategically optimize our lease space to satisfy DoD's mission requirements. To do so, the Department plans on continuing to leverage GSA's expertise to achieve cost-effective and quality leases while transitioning from expiring leases. In addition, we are leveraging GSA's leading-edge space management tools to optimize space usage and improve our utilization of all our facility spaces, both government-owned and leased. DoD is committed to effectively managing and drawing down its lease space inventory while executing its national defense mission. Our twin goals of improved utilization of existing government-owned space while minimizing our lease space inventory permit shifting of taxpayer resources to support the mission and reduce our overhead cost. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Braces. Mr. Allen, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you today the Department of Justice's challenges and opportunities in reducing the cost of real property leased through GSA. We certainly share your commitment to achieving taxpayer savings in today's real estate market. Given the department's size, number of locations, and unique mission requirements, leasing through GSA is delegated to each of the department's major components and bureaus, including the FBI, DEA, BOP, ATF, Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, U.S. Marshals Service, Executive Office of Immigration Review, and Office of Justice Programs. The Justice Management Division provides department-wide real property guidance, policy, and oversight. We also manage GSA's leasing for the headquarter components in the National Capital Region, amounting to approximately 15% of DOJ's portfolio. Under the leadership of Attorney General Eric Holder, DOJ has been committed to cost savings by effectively managing our real property and improving utilization efficiencies. For instance, the department successfully reduced our overall square footage in fiscal year 2013 from the fiscal year 2012 benchmark level. In addition, we continue to work closely with GSA to acquire leases that offer more efficient and cost-effective space to meet DOJ's varied mission requirements. As this subcommittee has emphasized, we too support negotiating longer-term leases wherever possible to maximize savings. In fiscal year 2013, the department developed a revised real property cost savings and innovation plan to support OMB's Freeze the Footprint initiative. The department's plan focuses on office and warehouse space, covers new construction and renovation projects, lease consolidations, replacement and succeeding leases, as well as disposal of owned and leased assets. The plan covers fiscal years 2013 through 2015 and highlights the benefits of effective real property management and initiatives, and the substantial savings that can be generated through space and operating cost reductions. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the subcommittee for its support and approval earlier this year for the first in a series of prospectus-level projects here in Washington, D.C. These projects will dramatically reduce our space usage by more than 25% for our headquarter litigating divisions. We also have other projects now in the pipeline that will continue our efforts to reduce our square footage and provide substantial cost savings in the out years. As to the number of GSA leases expiring in the near future, we also recognize the challenges and opportunities identified by this subcommittee. Between fiscal years 2015 and 2020, the department will have nearly 900 leases expiring nationwide. Our components have been working diligently with GSA on renewal and replacement strategies that identify opportunities for improved efficiencies and take advantage of today's favorable real estate market conditions. We continue to work with our components as well to manage both our owned and leased real property, while also pursuing new workplace strategies to better utilize our portfolio and save money. Thank you again for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Justice's important work in this area, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Allen. Mr. Holland, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, members of the subcommittee. My name is E.J. Holland, Jr. I am the Assistant Secretary for Administration at the Department of Health and Human Services. Under the leadership of former Secretary Kathleen Sebelius and our new Secretary Sylvia Burwell, the Department has continued its commitment to save taxpayer dollars through effective management of our real property assets, improve utilization through reduced space requirements, and pursue alternative workplace strategies that increase utilization and reduce costs. At the end of fiscal 2013, HHS had over 4,000 real property assets. We recognize that moving from GSA leased space to GSA owned space will save taxpayer dollars and have taken steps to consolidate space from leased locations into GSA owned space where it is available. A prime example is the ongoing consolidation of the Food and Drug Administration on its White Oak campus. Completion of the current master plan and consideration of further consolidation onto that campus will further reduce our leased footprint. The Mary E. Switzer building, a few blocks from here, consolidation is another project and an example of moving current leases into GSA-owned space. The Switzer building was identified to accommodate not only the headquarters of the Consolidated Administration of Children and Families, but also the Administration for Community Living, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, the Departmental Appeals Board, several components of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health, and other components of the Office of the Secretary. They were scattered in 7 leased locations and 2 federally owned buildings across the Southwest Complex area, just a bit west and south of here. This project will reduce HHS's footprint of lease space by over 349,000 rentable square feet, and HHS is moving what would have been more than $17 million in private sector lease payments to the federal building fund payments. We also have taken advantage of the GSA's FY14 omnibus appropriations for consolidation activities, which funds loans to agencies for consolidation projects. We submitted funding to consolidate the Office of the Chief Information Officer, another group which reports to me, into an alternative workplace pilot within the Humphrey building, again about 2 blocks from here, creating a more effective and collaborative working environment for the OCIO team. As a result, OCIO's usable square feet will be reduced by approximately 34,000 square feet, or 50%. After consolidating into the Humphrey building, the Office of the Chief Information Officer's utilization rate will be reduced from 207 square feet per person to 103 square feet per person. As evidenced by that low rate, this is our first opportunity to create a showcase space for employee mobility in our headquarters building, a strategic goal for HHS in its efforts to reduce its footprint. Additionally, this project will save HHS approximately $750,000 in annual rent costs and further reduce our footprint of lease space by over 57,000 square feet. We submitted our initial freeze the footprint plan for FY13 through FY15 in September of 2013. An update was submitted in May of 2014. As outlined in that plan, we faced several challenges in adhering to our plan. There were a number of large lease acquisitions and construction projects that were underway but not included in the baseline. Those projects will add 1.8 million square feet of space to our footprint over the next 2 years. Other challenges for us are the recent legislative mandates of this Congress that have asked us to do additional things and require increases in staff. This means there will, in fact, be some temporary additions to our real property footprint, but we will achieve the reduce the footprint effort by 2016. We also find that a significant challenge is the upfront costs needed to support consolidations and more efficient space utilization. We simply don't have a realistic way to do capital improvements. As a result, we've taken advantage of GSA's Total Workplace program for a number of our larger projects. However, not funding upfront capital investments in furniture, fixtures, and equipment has a direct impact on the immediate return on investment, and short-term, 3 to 5 year, actually increases our operating costs. We are committed to generating savings for the taxpayers through better utilization of our real property assets. The President's management agenda and benchmarking recently demonstrated we are making progress in improving utilization of our office's assets, but we also know opportunities remain for even better utilization. We recognize that our leased inventory is an opportunity to reduce costs, and we continue to work closely with GSA to identify opportunities for improved efficiencies in our leased portfolio. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I do welcome your questions.
Mr. Hall, I'm very impressed. Your agency is a good example of what we're trying to achieve. You're not only talking about it, but you're actually doing it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Warner, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Bartoletta, Ranking Member Carson, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today. I am DHS's Chief Readiness Support Officer and Senior Real Property Officer. I'm a career civil servant with 32 years' experience in the federal government, including positions in the Department of the Navy, Coast Guard, and now DHS headquarters. I manage DHS real estate, mobile asset, environmental compliance, and logistics, with a goal of providing our dedicated workforce with the operational tools and support they need to keep our nation safe at a reasonable cost to the taxpayers. Today, I will discuss how the Department, with General Services Administration support, will consolidate our footprint and save money while supporting the DHS mission. DHS's real property portfolio consists of 38,000 properties with 99 million square feet of space. Half of our real property is DHS-owned, and the remainder is leased. Additionally, half of our space is operational mission space and personnel housing, and the other half is predominantly office space. Lease payments account for 82% of our annual real estate costs at $1.7 billion annually. In support of our frontline mission, we at DHS continue to improve our management of real property with the support we receive from GSA. In addition, the administration's Freeze the Footprint initiative has proved to be of immense value to the Department of Homeland Security. In 2010, DHS and GSA began a partnership to improve our use of space by conducting a space use analysis in the National Capital Region. That partnership is delivering benefits, and specifically the Workforce Recommendations Report, which validated that an average office utilization rate of under 150 square feet per person is a reasonable and achievable target, and more so when mobility and telework becomes part of the equation. It also reinforced that real estate decisions are long lead time decisions. Additionally, this partnership and report is assisting with educating, training, and change management throughout the department in our space decisions. Key is that our organization has internalized the concept of efficient use of space, which is a critical step required to understanding and delivering a new way of managing space. We in DHS view lease expirations as an ideal opportunity for consolidation and economy. Over the next 5 years, 15 million office square feet nationally will be expiring. This is 27% of our total lease building portfolio and 48% of our office leased buildings. We have a 5-year plan, and we are monitoring all expirations to ensure that the Department's footprint and lease costs are optimally managed to deliver footprint reductions. We started with my own offices in D.C., where as a successful proof of concept, we reduced our footprint by 60% for over $1 million in annual savings. Another example of DHS and GSA as partners in delivering real estate solutions is the significant efficiencies that we will be achieving in the new space at One World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan. CBP will realize a 45% reduction in occupied space by implementing more flexible space design and incorporating mobile workplace concepts. This occupancy will result in space that meets mission needs at a cost avoidance of $5 million annually as a result of space compression. Despite challenges related to distance, culture, change management, and adopting new work practices, DHS headquarters, Customs and Border Protection, and GSA work together to achieve this. A 10-year period of growth in the DHS leased portfolio has leveled off. We expect modest declines in the footprint in the short term, but the 10-year opportunity created by lease expirations will build momentum towards significant future reductions as a result of the Department's 150 square foot per person requirement. Particularly over the next decade, 70% of our office space leases will expire, and we plan to achieve a 20% reduction and meet our mission while paying for 4.4 million square feet less than we occupy today. Real estate reduction strategies for the department's office locations are the focus of our FY15 work plan. 10 major cities contain in excess of 7 million square feet of DHS office space. For those top 10 field locations, we have assessed the requirements, cost, and expiration dates of existing leases to develop plans for lease compression, consolidation, and cost reduction. The National Capital Region currently has 10 million square feet of DHS office space. Here, DHS continues to work with GSA on our headquarters consolidation project. Consolidation will allow the strategic realignment of the real property portfolio in the National Capital Region to more effectively support our mission. DHS continues currently to occupy over 50 separate locations in the National Capital Region at an average space utilization of 200 square feet per person. Consolidation will contribute to reducing the number of locations and will bring our utilization rate below the 150 square feet standard, lower our facility costs, and provide quality workspace for our workforce. Finally, I'm happy to point out that DHS submitted our revised real property cost savings and innovation plan to OMB in September of 2013 and established its 48 million square feet of FY12 office space as our baseline, and we provided an update in May of 2014 that indicates we are meeting the Freeze the Footprint guidelines. In closing, DHS will continue to aggressively pursue real property strategies in partnership with GSA. We will lead departmental efforts to exceed the Freeze the Footprint objectives, and our ultimate goal remains to perform our mission support with effectively designed space for the way we work today without sacrificing mission effectiveness for our employees on the front line of Homeland Security. I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Warner. Mr. Spencer, you may proceed.
Chairman Barletta, Ranking Member Carson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Social Security to testify today. My name is Pete Spencer. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Budget, Finance, Quality, and Management. I'm also the agency's Chief Financial Officer. I retired after 44 years of service in 2011 and came back last March because I'm concerned about the budgets that we face and how we can restrict spending to make sure we meet both the needs of the American public with Social Security services and at the same time serve the American taxpayer. So we are delighted to be part of this discussion this morning. We are looking forward to learning about proven practices that you all, as members of the subcommittee, have actually shown us we can do as we move forward here. So I have three main points that I want to discuss today. First, we fully support and appreciate the work of this subcommittee. There's no question about the number of things that you've identified for us, and we look forward to learning the proven practices from others. Number two, we have a strong relationship with GSA, and we're working together to reduce our usable square footage and our annual rent costs. Unlike other agencies, however, we do not own property, nor do we have direct leasing authority. GSA handles all of that for us. Third, I think you all know that we have a unique community-based organization that requires a strong national network of field facilities in order to serve our public, whether that's in Hazleton or whether it's in Indianapolis or whether it's in Orlando or whether it's in the district or whether it's in Glen Burnie. You know, our local offices are there to serve, and that's part of our real estate footprint. Few programs touch as many lives as ours do. To help the millions of people we serve, we must maintain this network of offices across the country. It is not surprising, then, that we are GSA's fourth largest customer in commercial leases and the fifth largest customer in rent costs. We are fully committed to maintaining our local field facilities across the country in order to serve the public. Our Freeze the Footprint plan is not based on consolidating local offices in our communities. I want to underscore the fact that we continue to be an efficient organization. Our administrative costs are only 1.4% of the benefit payments we pay each year. So we're very proud of our efficiency at Social Security. Given the unique characteristics of our real estate portfolio, we are pleased to report that we have decreased our usable square footage by more than 330,000 square feet in fiscal year 13 compared to the 2012 baseline. We will reduce our square footage by the end of 14 by 1 million square feet, and by the end of 15 by 2 million square feet. GSA has worked with us to achieve our goal of freezing our 12-foot footprint, and they've also worked with us to lower our current annual rental costs. For example, we collaborate with GSA, as you have suggested, Mr. Chairman, to identify opportunities to reduce our rent in targeted markets by extending the lease terms and negotiating a lower rental rate in our existing leases. So for example, in Salinas, California, GSA extended the lease terms and was able to lower the rent by $7.50 per square foot. Based on that reduced rent, the projected rent savings over the subsequent 5-year period is about $3 million. So that's a good example of doing what you've asked us to do. That example, in addition to initiatives I've outlined in my written testimony, will help us reduce total usable space. I need to quickly add, however, that they may not be good enough to offset projected increase in rent costs. In many cases, these increases are due to the cost of improvements that must be made to many of our offices in our local communities in order to provide security for the in-person service that we give. But they certainly will help us offset most of those costs. In conclusion, we are delighted to have the opportunity to work with you, Mr. Chairman, and the subcommittee. We look forward to your ideas on how we could better manage our leased property in an efficient, cost-effective, and effective way. Thank you, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Spencer. I will now begin the first round of questions, limited to 5 minutes for each member. If there are additional questions following the first round, we'll have additional rounds of questions as needed. I'm going to start. This question is for all panelists. Each of your agencies have been directed by the President to cut your real estate costs. You also have heard there is a limited window of opportunity to replace your expiring leases with good long-term deals that improve utilization rates and save significant dollars. Will you commit to work with our committee to seize this opportunity, replace these leases on time, and achieve the President's savings goal? And I would appreciate a response from each agency. Ms. Barr?
Of course. We have, for the last 25 years, been guided by a strategy where we are trying to make sure that we put we serve the taxpayer by offering the lowest cost for the longest term lease. And we also, in order to facilitate the way we work together, provide opportunities for our bureaus to collaborate, since much of our business is conducted overseas. In that vein, we have consistently, for a number of years, tried to get into owned space. And recently, we were able to acquire property across the street from the State Department, Potomac Annex, from the Navy. It took us quite a while to finally finalize this transfer, but that's 7 acres, and it will give us an opportunity to look at all of our real estate in D.C. metro area and move them out of high-cost space into lower-cost space.
Thank you.
And we work
if I could have
closely
a
with
brief
GSA.
answer as we go through. Thank you for that information. Mr. Braces.
Mr. Chairman, yes, the Department of Defense is committed. We, in fact, have been working with the GSA very closely in looking at the 82 buildings that we're in today to come up with a strategic plan with them, looking over the next 5 years to aggressively achieve that 20% drawdown. And GSA has really helped lead us in this analysis, looking across the portfolio to commit to longer-term leases, anchor buildings that we're trying to move folks into to help get out of more leases.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we commit, and we believe we've already begun that process with our latest prospectus here in the Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Mr.
area.
Holland?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we commit to that. We'll continue doing precisely what you suggested we ought to be doing.
Thank you. Mr. Horner?
Absolutely. We enthusiastically make that commitment, and we appreciate the subcommittee's leadership on this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Spencer.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. 52% of our leases expire in the next 5 years. I have a list of them right here. We're working through the list as we speak.
Very good. Thank you. Short-term leases cost your agencies and a taxpayer an extra 20% in lease costs. Leases over 10 years can save an additional 10% or more and cover much of your upfront relocation costs. Yet the number of short-term extensions is growing each year. Will you commit to replacing your long-term lease requirements with leases that are at least 10 years? And I'd appreciate a brief response from each agency. Ms. Barr?
Yes.
Yes, to every extent possible.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Yes, sir, that's our objective.
Mr. Horner?
Yes, we make that commitment.
Yes, sir.
Each of your agencies have 50% to 70% of your leases expiring in 5 years. Reducing these costs by even 10% will result in a $300 million saving annually. How far in advance does the work need to begin to prepare for expiring leases, particularly larger prospectus-level leases? And are your agencies on track with your expiring leases so that we don't see holdovers or costly short-term extensions? Ms. Barr?
The first part of your question was, how far are we on track?
Yeah, how far in advance does the work need to begin to prepare for these expiring leases, particularly the larger prospectus-level leases?
We usually start working with GSA like 3 years in advance, like Mr. Dong mentioned before, and we are in constant conversations with GSAs about these leases and trying to put them into more cost-effective.
And are you on track with your expiring leases so that we don't see holdovers?
We are now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Braces?
We need 2 to 5 years in advance, and we're working with GSA right now looking downrange in the next 3 to 5 years. There are some leases that we may end up vacating entirely that may require some short-term periods so that we can get into the longer-term strategy. Our goal is to get into anchor buildings that have longer-term leases. Our more recent ones do. To the extent that we need some time to get out of situations we're in now to get into a longer term, may require some shorter term.
Good. Mr. Allen?
We agree with the 36 months, and I would say that where we're trying to consolidate leases, there may be some short-term extensions to marry up the expirations.
Mr. Holland?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure there is a date that I could say 36 or 48. When I got here 5 years ago, after having been safely ensconced in Kansas for a long time, I found that we had a major project that we're still working on that started in 2006. So my view is that we should be doing what GSA asked me to do 4 years ago, and that is to participate in an ongoing portfolio review. I got a call out of the blue one morning from somebody I didn't know, and he said, Mr. Holland, will you do this? I did the wrong thing as a manager. I did not go down the hall and talk to my folks. I said yes, and we've been doing that ever since. And so I view it as an ongoing project. There will be some holdovers because as we try to consolidate 2, 3, 4, 6 different divisions into a single space, the lease expirations won't be the same time. So in some cases, we'll have to have short holdovers. We have no choice. But if the ultimate objective is to get a bunch of different functions into a single building, I think it will be worth that effort.
Mr. Horner?
We begin working with GSA on lease expirations at least 3 years in advance of the lease expiring. That can be up to 5 years if it's a particularly complex project. And we are interested in long-term leases to save money for the taxpayers, and we would only allow a short-term extension in order to synchronize projects so that we can consolidate operations.
Mr. Spencer?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We certainly want to start well in advance, and we do that. We have very few short-term leases. I will just say in one defense of GSA that in some situations, and this is some place where I think the subcommittee can help us, we find that not always are we able to find someone who is willing to give us space on the commercial market. Believe it or not, some of the areas in which we have to locate our offices are those kinds of areas that are lower economic, and they do not necessarily suggest a situation in which somebody wants to build a building or give us a space that we might be able to use. But the bottom line is each situation requires us to look well in advance to make sure we do not have short-term leases. It is our goal not to have any.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Mr. Carson for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Barletta. Mr. Dong, can you please discuss the selection of the 3 sites for the new FBI headquarters and how that fits into the Freeze the Footprint initiative? And are you building a building or are you building a campus? And if you're unable to receive the full cost of a replacement facility with the value of the current headquarters, how will GSA and the FBI effectively make up the difference?
Can you speak into your microphone, please?
Mr. Dunn, can you just move the microphone a little bit closer? It's a little difficult up here.
No. If the technician could make the adjustment. You might need to use Madam Barr's microphone, sir. Thank you.
One more time. Okay.
There we are.
There we go.
All right.
As you mentioned, GSA announced the short list of potential sites for the FBI headquarters yesterday. That process was the product of a thorough review and evaluation of sites submitted by private bidders as well as federally owned sites against criteria that were clearly stated in our initial advertisement, things such as delineated area and access to transportation and minimum acreage. And through that process, the evaluation committee and the source selection official identified what they thought were the 3 most viable sites that would meet the FBI requirements. You talked about the swap construct process where we would be taking the value of the Hoover building and trading that for construction services towards the development of the new FBI headquarters facility. What we want to be able to do is to let the market tell us what the value is for that building. If there is a potential valuation gap, we want to be able to come back to this committee to talk about options for bridging that gap.
Thank you. Madam Barr, given the increasing cost of real estate in the Foggy Bottom area of D.C. and Rosslyn, Virginia, do you believe it is in the taxpayers' interest to reevaluate the State Department policy of consolidating in these particular markets?
Well, I'd like to take 1 minute to just explain how we accomplish our mission. Since we're primarily focused on supporting operations overseas, unlike bureaus and other agencies, we have to collaborate closely in order to fulfill that mission. For example, when we have to reduce staffing because of security or natural disaster, it takes more than just the Diplomatic Security Bureau. It also involves the Regional Bureau, because sometimes when we pull people out, that has an impact on our bilateral relationship with those countries. It involves consular affairs, because we have to make sure that we treat private American citizens the same as we treat ourselves when it comes to assessing whether there are problems there. We often have other types of programs like democracy building that involve other functional bureaus. So when we need to make a complicated decision in a short period of time, it often is better if we can do it together. In addition to that, because we often have security requirements, and these conversations are easier in that case to take place in a classified environment, being able to bring people quickly together helps us to do that. And we recognize that it is expensive to have things located in the Foggy Bottom or Rosslyn area. Yes. So those routine things, we make a concerted effort to push them elsewhere. Like we own that facility in Charleston. We have HR, we have financial services. We push some of our consular affairs production facilities down there because we do recognize that money is important, so we only put high-value things close to the Foggy Bottom area.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Spencer, with the over 43 million Americans visiting your offices annually, the SSA is somewhat different from other agencies before us today because of the level of interaction that the SSA has with the public. How does that guide your decision as you look to reduce your federal footprint?
It is a challenge for us because we do have to account for the fact that we do have those visitors coming in our offices. They bring family members with them, so we need space for them. So as we set our space standards in the local field office, we have a standard for the individual employee, but then also the standard for the individuals who are going to be visiting our offices. So we have to put both of those factors into play when we decide how much space we need in a particular office. I will also say that we're looking for alternative means of exchanging information with the public, using the internet more and so on. That certainly does guide us as well.
That's great. Thank you all.
Chair would like to recognize former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Micah.
Thank you, Mr. Barletta, and thank you for carrying on an important subcommittee role in conducting this important hearing today about trying to get the best deal for the taxpayers, particularly on leased property. Mr. Dong, how long have you been now in your position? I've been at GSA for just over 4 months. 4 months, okay. Well, you're not aware of some of the history of what's taken place with some of the leases and all, but actually back with Mr. Oberstein, I was reminding staff, as some of the staff came on some years ago, at the bottom of the recession, I had been in real estate, so Mr. Oberstein and I got in a van, maybe Dan Matthews was with us, and we looked at vacant properties around Washington, D.C., because there was a fire sale going on. Prices were down. And we looked at different places, leases expiring. Not too much was done, unfortunately. There were some new leases cast, but now you're back up again in price. This is a list that I was given of vacant properties in the district, and they start from 374,000 contiguous square feet, prices from, here's a $28.78 a square foot. The highest I see up is about $61, but most of them in the 40s. What are you paying now on average in the district? Do you know? Yes?
Don't have the exact figure, but I'm happy to follow up.
But there's lots of property available. There's still some good deals, not like there used to be. We'll submit that for the record, and also if staff will provide Mr. Dong with a copy, would be appreciated. Thank you. Yesterday I conducted a hearing, and I've been trying to get information that our committee has, I think, back to this subcommittee from OMB on the amount of vacant space. And finally, after issuing a subpoena and some threats, we did get a response and got a report just recently on the amount of vacant space. Now, there's some big offenders here with vacant space. DOD is one of the worst. They have a huge inventory of vacant space. In fact, this report from OMB identified 7,500 properties or buildings, 3,292 excess buildings or properties, and 4,208 underutilized. One of the things we found from that report is it wasn't complete. So it's actually much worse than that. What are you doing, Mr. Dong, to make certain that we have excess federal properties? Here in the district, we have excess federal properties vacant, that we fill them with some of the activities. Is that an agenda item that you're looking at? And across the country, of course.
Absolutely. We want to be able to look at our federal buildings to identify those assets that are underutilized or underperforming, and to make sure that at the end of the day we're seeing highest and best use of all of our federal assets.
Okay.
So some examples, we talked about the old post office building. That's where a situation where we saw that that building.
Well, we've held hearings. This subcommittee, my very first hearing as chairman, we dragged the staff down there, and the vacant portion of the building, the old annex, had been vacant for 15 years. Nearly half of the 370,000 square feet were vacant, and losing around $6 to $8 million a year. Very familiar with that one. That is a turnaround. But in politics and in GSA, you can't sit on your laurels or your assets. So I'm more interested in what we're going to do to move forward to fill some of these. One of the problems too, you have very limited area. You have thousands of buildings and properties, but the federal government, a lot of them outside your jurisdiction. For example, DOD. DOD has huge assets. We don't have a good inventory. Now, I just got an inventory of 8 vacant or underutilized, but a good current inventory, too, of the leased properties. And that's something we need to haul OMB in here, Mr. Barletta, too, and see that each agency reports specifically on leased and where they are with their leases, et cetera. So what you're doing, we would have some handle on how we can get them to move forward. And then there are impediments the agencies face into, and that's something else we need to deal with so they can get rid of those things. I will give GSA, there's some new kids on the block, including Mr. Dong. And some of your folks the last few months are now looking at more creative ways of leasing and actually of not going circumventing, but dealing with the impediments that Congress or law has in place by creative leasing. And we're very supportive of that because if it makes sense for the taxpayers, it's very important. DHS, I've done everything I can close down any further new buildings for you. We made a huge mistake, and it was a committee across the hall and creating DHS in its current form. It's too big. Anyone who ever thought that combining 22 agencies and over 200,000 people would be more efficient is not dealing with common sense or ability to manage agencies. Very concerned. I want to do everything I can to make certain you don't build another, a monument to bureaucracy at the St. Elizabeth site. We needed to do something with the Coast Guard, and that has been done and adequate. And we might even look at putting some of that property up for sale or lease to the private sector. Consolidation of some of your leases is a goal. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
We're looking at consolidating our leases in the
and some of that
nationwide.
Some of that may make sense, and maybe we'll also have the committee provide you with a copy of some of the properties that are available at still some pretty reasonable rates. But again, big bureaucracies require big spaces. My goal is to get the size of the bureaucracy down, consolidate the space, and save taxpayers money. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The chair recognizes Ms. Holmes Norton for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate this hearing. I'd like to find from Mr. Ormer, I suspect that's who I should be asking. The Coast Guard building was planned before the requirement for space reduction, space utilization reduction. How are you reducing space in the Coast Guard, and will that mean you're able to consolidate more of the Coast Guard into the Coast Guard?
Congresswoman, you're exactly correct. We did plan that before we had our new space standards. It's my estimate that we can put up to an additional 1,000 people into the Coast Guard headquarters building. Our plan is, the Coast Guard has various offices and lease space in Arlington. Our plan is to move all of those people, as those leases expire, into the new Coast Guard headquarters building.
So you think you could get the entire Coast Guard into that one building?
The entire National Capital Region Coast
Yes,
Guard,
so.
yes, and that'll save the Coast Guard roughly $7 million a year in rent. and we may be able to put a couple of other offices on top of that. So we will achieve over the next year and a half to 2 years significantly greater density in that building.
Excellent. Mr. Dong, what is the effect of reducing the footprint or reducing the utilization per employee for these agencies that remain in place or reluctant to move? So they're there. There is this outstanding requirement. Their space remains as it is, holdover or whatever, especially if they do not move, say they cannot move, don't have the money to move. Is there any way to enforce this standard, or is the only way to enforce it to have the agency move?
We've seen examples of how agencies are able to improve their utilization as they stay in their existing space. So if we look, for example, at FEMA, where their headquarters is at 500 C Street, they've been able, that is their headquarters building, they've been able to dramatically improve the utilization of that building.
Space, was that leased? That was not leased. That was leased space.
That is a leased space, but that is an example where they had a number of different facilities across the National Capital Region. They were able to reduce the number of facilities by putting more of their staff within that headquarters building. So I think we're seeing examples across the government of how agencies recognize that excess spending on real property comes at the expense of more mission-critical activities.
So you are requiring the reduction in space even for agencies that are remaining in space and have no intention of moving?
We're working with agencies to help them reduce their footprint, whether they're in leased space, whether they're in owned space. We're looking for any and all opportunities to help them reduce their spending on real property.
Ms. Dong, as you know, you own buildings, or you lease buildings where you have no intention, the agency has no intention of ever moving. We are buying these buildings seriatim. Is there a purchase option in every lease, new lease today?
We don't have purchase options in every lease, and I would say that the days of bargain purchase options are behind us, and we recognize that purchase options aren't free. But again,
nor is leasing the space over and over again free to the taxpayers.
You're absolutely right.
So I want to know what you're doing with purchase options. What are you doing to acquire space so you have to lease less space? You say in your testimony that GSA hopes to demonstrate the value of investments that reduce the real estate footprint. Ms. Barr talked about apparently owning or buying space across from the State Department. Are you looking at public-private partnerships, for example, to complete the Department of Homeland Security? That first building, the Coast Guard, was finished on time and on budget. Because of annual appropriations, it has been slowed, especially with the reduction in appropriations. But even if there had been appropriations as planned on an annual basis, it's very hard to build a complex asking the government to put the money down each year. Now, you know, that's the cheapest way to build a building, but is there a way to complete at least some of the buildings using a public-private partnership, and are you investigating that alternative as a way to complete some of the Department of Homeland Security?
Congresswoman Norton, let me come back to the first part of your question. As my colleagues here have testified, we're seeing some great examples of how agencies are moving from leased space into owned space. Assistant Secretary Holland talked about the consolidation at the Switzer building. I mentioned earlier about what we're trying to do in Detroit by moving 4 different lease locations into what would be a federally owned building. We're seeing some good examples across the federal landscape.
You bought a building in Detroit.
Correct. In terms of St. Elizabeth...
That was a purchase option, wasn't it?
That was a purchase option. In terms of St. Elizabeth's, we recognize the current constraints that we're operating under. We are open to exploring any and all innovative approaches that would allow us to support...
Are you exploring a public-private partnership to complete the St. Elizabeth's complex?
We're open to any and all options for.
So you're not exploring, you're just open?
We want to make sure that we are looking at all viable options for completing this project. And I know that this is an important issue to members of this committee, and we look forward to working with you on this.
I think it was Mr. Holland that mentioned the upfront capital investments as an impediment to reducing the space. Are you amortizing the costs, or any agency that wants to do so and can do so in order to take advantage of the need in order to enforce your mandate to reduce the space of each agency?
We want to be able to help.
This will be the first excuse given that we can't pay for the upfront costs.
The upfront costs in the past have been a significant obstacle that have prevented agencies from doing the right thing in terms of co-locating and consolidating and reducing their footprint. We see two things that change that dynamic. One is the total workplace program that I mentioned before that allows us to amortize the costs of furniture and IT and other upfront expenses that had previously been an obstacle to being able to make that move. Two is in our fiscal year 15 budget, we request $100 million to support agency consolidation efforts. The amount that we received in fiscal year 14, the $70 million, has been a force multiplier for us in terms of being able to work with agencies to reduce their footprint.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time is Mr. Holland indicated that he was having difficulties with the program, and yet the answer here has been that they are able to move ahead. So I'm not sure that I understand if Mr. Holland's needs are being met by what Mr. Dong has just said.
Congressman Norton, we in fact are taking very aggressive advantage of Mr. Dong described, both at the Park Lawn project in Rockville and at the Switzer project here. We couldn't have done those projects without that help. My observation was to the point that this is a problem all the time. We've got ways to solve it here, and we have, but I'll have other opportunities, and even $100 million is not unlimited, and Mr. Dong won't always be able to meet my needs. A more thoughtful private sector type way of handling capital investments would be helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to attend this meeting, and thank you, panelists, for your presentation. When we had our last prospectus level project approval, I was the only voice vote no, because I was somewhat shocked at a couple of the examples I saw there of the new leases. One in particular was in a metropolitan area. It was in the same building as a expiring long-term lease. They were just going to re-up the lease. And the cost over the lease period was around $1,100 to $1,200 per square foot for the entire lease. So I figured, I was just sitting there at my desk, and I said, this distance here to here would be around $5,000 to $6,000. And I was really concerned about that because the lease that was being completed, the only option was to either leave or re-up. There was no lease purchase or anything. So, and then the new lease, there was also no agreement. So by the end of the full term, from the start to the finish, there would have been paid out about $2,200 per square foot. The building would probably be, if it's a normal building, would be about half its life cycle had been expired, and yet you could have built, 5 times, 4 times, 3 times the building if it had been built and owned by the federal government, and you still, at the end of that time frame, would have had only used half the life of the building. So, Mr. Dong, my question would be, what criteria do you use to determine whether or not there'll be a lease purchase agreement? Is there some, when you start 3 years ahead and you begin planning out, are there things that you, is there a checklist that you go down to determine what is the best buy, life cycle cost, energy cost, lease to own? All of those are just buying it outright. Is there a checklist that's a standardized checklist?
Our preference is to have federally owned buildings as opposed to leased buildings. There are situations, as you know, where we have to be in lease arrangements. You mentioned earlier purchase options, and we want to be able to see those in more of our lease arrangements, but we recognize that, again, those come at a cost. So it really is dependent on the specifics of the transaction in terms of when a purchase option would be appropriate.
But wouldn't a lease that expires and you re-up it and it expires again, there's a cost to that too, because at the end of that time frame, you have nothing to show for it except you have to go out and lease again. Wouldn't there be some consideration with that? I assume that's in your calculation. Is that true?
Absolutely. And again, we want to be able to kind of look more strategically at these transactions, not just to get caught up in the cycle of leasing, but to really think through what is the longer-term strategy for this asset and for the tenants in this asset.
The last list of projects that we approved, most of them were those leases were in urban areas. Given technology and other advances, can't you be just about anywhere you want to be, including some less urban area that would be a lot less expensive to operate? Is that considered?
Absolutely. There are two things that we emphasize. First and foremost, it's about meeting agency mission requirements, but we want to make sure that we're doing so in a fiscally responsible way. So it really comes back to a collaborative dialogue with the agency in terms of what their specific requirements are, whether they need to be downtown in the central business district or they could be out in the suburbs, and really understand what the trade-offs are given their requirements, and look to balance both objectives in terms of meeting agency mission requirements, but doing so in a fiscally responsible way.
Okay, Mr. Orner, sorry. I had one question. You said you're about 50% owned, 50% leased, and you're the only one that mentioned that, so I would ask you, is that a static number? Is it moving? Are you moving towards more owned, or are you moving towards more leases?
It's a relatively static number. The large majority of our own spaces are Coast Guard and CBP, and the Coast Guard, we're talking about stations, Coast Guard stations, depots. We don't buy and sell a lot of those, so it's relatively static.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. The chair recognizes Ms. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to say special thanks to the ranking member, because I had intentionally not planned to ask a question about the FBI and the land swap, but I appreciate the response. It does raise a question that I had, though, and it's about process, and so I appreciate that, Mr. Dong, you've explained the process, because sometimes I know we get confused and annoyed by process, but in the case of GSA leasing, and I know this is true in the metropolitan Washington area, process is in fact very important, because it can lead to a better deal for the taxpayer if things are fair, if they are transparent, and if there's a competitive process for leasing. And I think when that happens, it can also create an environment in which you don't invite protest, appeal, and litigation. And so I've been really interested in the process. I represent a district, as you know, right outside of the District of Columbia in Prince George's and Anne Arundel County, but I want to focus on on Prince George's County, because that's been a subject of some process. The Office of Management and Budget, through its approval of GSA rent requests, is largely responsible for setting the prospectus rent caps nationwide. But nowhere is the scrutiny more draconian than I think it is here in the National Capital Region, where OMB sets a one-size-fits-all cap for leasing in Northern Virginia, the District of Columbia, and suburban Maryland. And quite ironically, these caps are often well below those approved in other parts of the country, whatever the economy, despite the Washington region's higher prevailing market rents. In the District of Columbia, that cap is at about $50, in Maryland $35, and in Virginia $39. I am really hard-pressed to understand, and I've asked numerous times when GSA and our agencies have been in front of us, what explains the disparity in one metropolitan region, and why is that disparity only present in the Washington metropolitan region. One of your predecessors 2 years ago in 2011, when I asked, could not explain that at all when he was in front of this committee. And I will tell you what he said to me in 2011. And this is a quote from Mr. Robert Peck, who was the GSA's public building, in charge of the Public Building Service. And he said, quote, "I think that there is the opportunity to make some adjustments here or overhaul that system, and I'm looking forward to doing it." So I want to fast forward from 2011 to 2014, and the cap disparity that I described still exists without any other explanation. And I know we've talked about this before, but I have to get your commitment on the record that GSA will provide an answer and a response, and something that is acceptable, that gives relative competitive weight in the region for each of the jurisdictions that compete in this region. While one can understand the District of Columbia, it's a city, I don't understand the disparity among all of the suburbs, and that hasn't been explained sufficiently, and it has to be resolved because it creates such a disadvantage to those who want to develop and provide a taxpayer-based resource for the federal government. So, Mr. Dong, I will ask you on the record, do I have your commitment within a time certain to get back to this committee on that question?
Yes, you have my commitment. I want to come back to the whole notion of competition and getting the best deal for federal agencies and for the American taxpayer. I am still looking into this issue of rent caps. As I mentioned earlier, I've only been on this job for about 4 months. There's a lot more that I need to learn about rent caps. I know that this is a critically important issue to you and to other members of the subcommittee. I'm looking into it, and I commit to get back to you on this.
I appreciate that, because if we look at the millions of lease space that's going to be available, this element of this rent cap could end up costing the taxpayer millions of dollars if we don't resolve the issue. And so I'd appreciate that. And I want to just say, lastly, if you would indulge me, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Holland, you raised an interesting question, and I believe that when you referred to the success in Rockville, you were referring to Park Lawn, and I just have to ask whether you think the appropriate role of the agencies, and this can be open to other members on the panel, whether the appropriate role for the agency is to dictate the details to such minutia in the requirements that it could, in fact, constrain decision making. And I would point specifically to the Park Lawn lease, in which HHS was insisting that we identify requirements such as location near dry cleaners. Do you think that's an appropriate conversation for a federal government agency to be engaged in to get a good deal for the taxpayers when it comes to lease requirements?
First of all, Congressman Edwards, that was before my time, so I don't know.
I know. Trouble is, you work at the agency.
Yeah, I inherited it. I inherited that project. That's the one I alluded to that had been going on since 2006. I will say that the department, and as you know, that we have 4 operating divisions going into that facility, the department does need to provide oversight. Otherwise, I have so many different desires and views that we can't ever achieve consensus. And with GSA's help, we've been doing that. I wouldn't think that I need to dictate where dry cleaners are, and I'm pretty confident I wouldn't be able to make that stick. But I do think we have to provide standards, and that's what I've tried to be up to.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to yield just by saying to the chairman, we've had the experience on this committee of looking at potential leases and seeing those kinds of things being dictated wherever it's coming from within agencies. And it really hampers the ability of the taxpayer to get the best deal for the dollar. And I think that there should be some way that GSA, whether it is needs additional oversight authority, so that GSA is in the driver's seat for the taxpayer, and not that we shouldn't consider the concerns of the agencies, but the driver has to be the GSA in making determinations about baselines for requirements and about standardizing a process so that the taxpayer can have the confidence when that lease is let that we've gotten a good deal. And I don't know that that is always the case, and I think those are the kind of things that this subcommittee, should be looking at for the future, given the the number of leases and the value of the dollar that's coming up in this committee. Thank you.
I agree with you. They do it with ceiling heights in the district, which also limits competition and a good rate. So it's a good point. Before we begin our second round, the chair is going to recognize Mr. Micah for additional 30 seconds. He has another hearing to attend to. Mr. Micah?
Well, thank you. And Mr. Dong, yesterday we did a hearing. You sent Mr. Michael Gelber to the Deputy Commissioner of Public Buildings. I mentioned to him that this actually starting back with the work on this committee, we got Dorothy Robine, she was the former building commissioner, to consider putting together a panel of experts for GSA who have great skills in disposing or best practices for utilizing property vacant and otherwise. You actually have that panel in place. They've been selected in May 2013 this came out. Mr. Gelber said he had not met with this panel. I said, would you meet? He said he would. I said, could you get Mr. Dong to also meet? Will you meet with the panel? Because they have some great ideas, great experience. They've only dealt with like a dozen properties or so and a couple $100,000. But these people have the expertise and knowledge that I think would be helpful. Will you meet with them?
I will meet with the panel. I want us to be aggressive on this question of property disposition.
And I'll get you a copy of this, and that will avoid another subpoena. Thank you.
We will now begin our second round of questioning. Mr. Dong, the upfront cost of an agency move can lead an agency to stay in place without any reductions in space, improvements to their utilization rates, or a competitive procurement. Relocation and replication costs regularly run between $100 and $200 per square foot, yet GSA's eternal policy only allows $40 per square foot to be amortized into the lease. Since these costs are stopping agencies from getting good long-term leases that save millions of dollars, will GSA consider changing this policy?
I think it comes back to the larger commitment that we have to breaking down the barriers that prevent agencies from co-locating and consolidating and reducing their footprint, and we want to find any and all opportunities to do that.
Again, Mr. Dong, you have there's 100 million square feet of expiring leases in the next 5 years, and that's obviously a tremendous amount of work. To take advantage of this opportunity, it must be an all-hands-on-deck effort at GSA and at the tenant agencies. You have a no-cost contract that gives you access to the best commercial real estate talent in the country. Your own data shows that they negotiate better deals for the taxpayer on leases over 50,000 square foot. Yet GSA's use of the brokers has declined every year to where they are not being used anywhere close to their potential. Given your responsibility to replace 100 million square feet of leases in the next 5 years, please tell me in the committee how you are going to maximize the use of the brokers to seize this opportunity and benefit the taxpayers.
If we look at the bow wave of expiring leases, I need to utilize every resource at my disposal to make sure that we are getting on top of that workload and that we are getting out of the cycle of holdovers and extensions. You talk about the national broker contracts. I think that's an important resource that we need to bring to bear on this problem, particularly as we look at the larger markets with more complex procurements.
All right. Anyone can answer this question, any of the panelists. What are some of the other major challenges preventing your agency from getting your leases replaced on time with good deals, and what can GSA or this committee do to overcome those challenges? Anyone who wants to jump in?
Mr. Chairman, I've already suggested to you what I think is the biggest problem. And as we solve the problem with GSA's help, it creates another problem, and that is the operating expenses of our divisions have to be inflated for 3 to 5 years, depending upon whether it's technology or furniture and equipment. That's the biggest gap. The other is something that, again, I would give GSA credit for helping us, is helping employees understand that the changes we're going to make are, in fact, appropriate changes, and in the end, they'll think they're good changes. I assume the committee of members have visited 18th and F and seen where Mr. Dong and Mr. Tagliolini have their offices. I've taken multiple people from my department over there. We have to educate people. I come from the private sector. I spent 41 years in the private sector before I came here 5 years ago, and what we're doing here is SOP, standard operating procedure in the private sector. We need to educate more and more of our employees that that's the right way to do things. And in the end, frankly, they like it. And if we do more of that, we'll have fewer problems doing the consolidations. I think Congresswoman Norton asked about doing things while we're in place. We're doing several things while we're in place. It is not ideal, frankly, because we actually disrupt operations during the time we're doing reconstruction while people are still there. But it can be done if and only if the employees, their managers, and their leaders accept that risk and understand what we can do for them.
Ms. Dong, in recent years, GSA has pulled back delegated leasing authorities from tenant agencies. If GSA's delegated leasing authority was managed to ensure proper oversight, including application of prospectus process, that may address problems that have occurred in the past. Has GSA examined whether lease delegations could help with the workload?
Our view is that we've developed a center of excellence and a core competence in the issue of leasing. That's GSA's core competence. We want agencies to be able to focus on their core mission functions. We believe that leasing is our core mission function, and we believe that we do that well. And we want to be able to support agencies, whether we do it, whether they have delegated leasing authority. We still feel that we can provide strong support in the process.
Has any of your agencies used the delegation authority in the past, and do you think such authority could help get these leases replaced on time?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the Department of Health and Human Services does in fact use the delegated authority for a variety of things, although 70% of our space, 70% of our overall 54 million square feet of real estate is owned by the federal government. We do it both ways. I'm frankly not sure there's magic either way, and even in that case, we look to GSA to use its expertise to help us.
Thank you. Anyone else want to?
Well, speaking for DHS, I agree with Mr. Dong. They do have a center of excellence for leases, particularly for generic office space. I'm perfectly happy with the existing arrangement. They're able to meet our needs.
The chair will recognize Ranking Member Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Allen, the DOJ has significantly reduced its space standards up by 25%. What was your most effective argument to your employees in getting them to accept a new normal with respect to space allocations?
I don't think there's a single argument. I think that we all want to work together to accomplish our mission in the most effective and efficient means possible. And we've had that conversation about how can we do things differently today than we've done in the past to make us more effective and efficient and use taxpayer resources wisely. So those conversations have occurred, and they need to continue to occur to make this happen.
Mr. Holland, if HHS were to receive capital funding for renovations, furniture, and fixtures, you believe you would be able to gain even more savings in your real estate program?
Yes, sir, I do.
Yeah. Madam Barr, can you please commit to the committee, ma'am, to reevaluate the State Department's strategy to locate the majority of its leased space in the Foggy Bottom and Roslyn area? I'm going back to that again, and report back to us respectfully on the cost and benefits of such a strategy?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dong, under Administrator Tangolini, we have seen the agency operate more like a real estate agency. That has not much been the history of GSA. It has been more innovative, for example. I mean, the FBI trade is an example of that. I was troubled, therefore, that this week I had to introduce a bill to ask the GSA to do what it already has the authority to do. Now, you will recall that the old post office came out of a bill I had to introduce because GSA just wouldn't develop the process. I haven't had to introduce a bill to develop property that the government owns since the old post office building, but this week I introduced a bill to redevelop the entire Department of Energy Forestall complex. And I felt I had to do that for the very same reason, well, not the very same reason, because GSA was not doing its complete job. It has put out, it has indicated that it wants to develop part of, indeed the greater part of the property, the Cotton Annex, the GSA regional office, but they left out some parcels. There isn't any professional party in real estate who would have a great big parcel and say, we're going to develop this entire parcel. Understand, this is part of GSA's own eco-district plan, which has been approved by the National Capital Area, the NCPC, sorry. Why would you leave out some parcels? Are we back into GSA doing what the agency says do instead of doing what your statute says do and what the Congress says do? And you're not developing some small parcels. Some of it may be parcels that the Department of Energy wants to deal with on its own terms. But why in the world would GSA leave out small parcels in a total section of land that can bring return to the federal government? Why are you not developing the entire Department of Energy Forestall complex? And what is the reason for the parcels that have been left out?
Congresswoman Norton, when we look at the parcel of property on Federal Triangle South, we want to make sure that we're getting highest and best use for all of the parcels, not just the Cotton Annex and the regional office building.
Well, you've got the GSA regional office, you've got the Cotton Annex, you've got some small parcels that are left out. My question is very particular, Mr. Don. Why are those small parcels, which apparently I can't say are owned by the Department of Energy, but in the possession, perhaps, of the Department of Energy, at least one of them. Why are they left out as a kind of pockmark in the total net land that you wish to redevelop?
We want to make sure that we've got viable housing strategies for the agencies that are on those other parcels. When you mention the regional office...
You'll get housing strategies if you put it in there, because then everybody will begin to look for the appropriate housing. You leave them out, then, of course, there's no incentive for them to find, especially when the parcels are so small. And, of course, we know, and if you want to complicate things for the federal government, we know as well that the railroad is coming in these adjacent parcels, that there's value for the federal government in those parcels because the railroad would obviously be one of those who wish those parcels. You have even negotiated with interests who are involved, and yet you've left them out. It just makes no economic sense from the government's point of view. And if you want to find housing for the government, don't tell me that again, because that was the excuse of GSA for not developing the old post office. They had agencies in there. So you've got an agency. That agency, the Department of Energy, will get space. It will be able to reduce its footprint. You will get land and a return on that land for the federal government that you do not get now. What possible reason could there be for not putting the whole parcel out if you put most of it out?
I agree with you. We need to get highest and best use for all of the parcels in Federal Triangle South. Based on the RFI and the responses to the RFI that we issued last year, what the market was telling us is that we needed to, move out on these two parcels first, but our plan and our commitment is not to ignore these other parcels in Federal Triangle South.
You see what you forced me to do. And the last time you forced me to put in a bill, the Congress passed this bill. So I want to just tell you right now, I'm going to press very hard for Congress to pass the bill to develop the entire parcel that I introduced this week. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. An important factor the committee considers before approving a lease prospectus is the all-in utilization rate. That means the total usable square footage of a building divided by the number of people working there. While we do not have a one-size-fits-all standard, we're looking for significant improvements in good utilization rates for how the building is used. Barring a few unique exceptions, the committee has not approved prospectuses with all-in utilization rates of over 200 usable square feet per person. Mr. Holland, can you talk about how HHS has instituted the 170 usable square feet per person standard, and is that department-wide, and does it include common areas in the calculation?
Yes, sir. We adopted that now 3 years ago. The Office of the Secretary issued instructions to that effect. We've had cooperation from our several agencies. We operate through a federated system of a bunch of independent operating divisions, and they've been following it. Now, I don't want to sit here and tell the committee that we always get to 170. Sometimes we'll be below it. Sometimes we're not quite there. It depends on the shape and scope of the building, for example. We're having a little trouble. Switzer is an example. It's not a modern, contemporary building that's easy to lay out. So what we do is use that as a target. My project with my CIO will get well under it. We've got some others where we're a little over it. But we will, generally speaking, use that as a target. I'm reminded of the old saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. That's why we use that as the target.
And to the other agencies, what are your all-in utilization rate targets, and how are you applying them as the leases expires? Ms. Barr?
200 or less, and as we're renovating our building right now, our headquarters, and in the new space we expect to be able to put in 1,500 more employees, and I'm actually doing this in my own section, which It's not always easy, as referred to earlier, getting employees to understand, but we're full on board with this.
Mr. Brazos.
The Department of Defense 200 also, our most recent prospectus for Suffolk and other buildings, our longer-term leases we've entered into have consistently been at 200 and below is really our target.
Okay. Mr. Allen.
We took a different approach in 2012 and mandated per-person office size standards of 130 square feet for most people, less than 100 for law enforcement agencies. Our latest prospectus that this subcommittee approved was at 240, reflecting special use needs for attorneys and litigating divisions. So we'll vary, but we'll meet our per-person office standards across the department.
Mr. Warner.
Our number is 150. Every time a lease expires, our commitment is to get under 150. Now that's an average, and in some cases we have needs for highly specialized spaces, SCIFs and whatnot that will skew the numbers for a particular organization, but we're committing to an average of under 150.
Mr. Spencer.
Mr. Chairman, as was pointed out earlier, we have a range of kinds of opportunities in our organization. Certainly in our community-based field offices, we have a different arrangement there with the public needing to be considered. But when it comes to prospectus level, which we're going to be sending to you in the next 5 years, we have a number of those, and we're certainly going to be looking to make sure we're within the 200 square feet.
Thank you. So far this year, the committee has received 3 lease prospectuses for the fiscal year 2015 leasing program, including one for the State Department, one for the FBI. Given the amount of potential prospectus level leases expiring in the next 5 years, this seems a little low. Mr. Dong, will we be receiving more, and if so, when can we expect them?
Mr. Chairman, you have my commitment that you will be receiving the balance of the lease prospectuses in the coming weeks.
Great, thank you. The other panelists, each of your agencies should have prospective level leases before us soon. Where are those prospectuses in the process, and which ones should we see this year?
Excuse me, we definitely have one with you now. I'll have to get back to you on how many more we'll send to you this year.
Mr. Brazos?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to get back to you on the record on the precise number pending.
Okay. Mr. Allen?
I'll get back to you on the precise number, but I know we have 2 for litigating divisions here in Washington coming soon.
Mr. Chairman, Department of Health and Human Services has none coming this year, and in fact, we pulled one recently as part of our consolidation into the Switzer building. There was a prospectus lease pending, and we are able to avoid that and not go back out to the lease market and instead move into a GSA-owned building. I'll have to get back to you on whether we have any in the coming years, but frankly, as I look at our lease expirations, we have a substantial number of them have happened or are in the process of happening, and I'm not sure we have a significant number of prospectus leases, and frankly, I will try to avoid those because I will try to work with Mr. Dong and Mr. Tangerlini to move into federally owned space wherever we can.
Mr. Warner?
Mr. Chairman, I will get back to you with a list of this year's lease prospectus.
Mr. Spencer?
Mr. Chairman, Social Security does not have any this year.
This is my final question. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to save taxpayers a lot of money and help your agencies get quality space that meets your needs and helps you protect your personnel. However, I'm very concerned that we're going to miss this opportunity if we continue with business as usual. So I am open to considering a pilot program for a limited amount of time, which would simplify the leasing process and give you greater flexibility to cover your upfront costs. The leases would need to have good utilization rates, be long-term and competitive, but in exchange, you get a fast-track process. Do you think this could help us get the job done?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's important that collectively we look at the current process and we identify any and all opportunities to streamline the process and, as you said, take advantage of the current market opportunity.
I agree with Mr. Dong.
As do I, Mr. Chairman.
And as I do.
the same response, or I would say that we have two ongoing examples. The Park Lawn project is now pushing 12 years old, or 10 years old, pardon me, and the Switzer project, on the other hand, is about 18 months old and will finish before Park Lawn. So where we can get help, and GSA has been very helpful in Switzer, we can move more quickly, and any pilot project that the committee comes up with would be welcome.
DHS would also welcome such a pilot. The opportunity to streamline the timeline and find a way of covering the upfront costs would be welcomed.
We absolutely would agree that we would be interested in pursuing this. One of the problems we've had, Mr. Chairman, is adequate sustained funding where you know where you're going to be able to go in the long run. We had a prospectus level project that was approved as a prospectus level project, but then funding was not available, and we actually had started moving people out of the building, left lower utilization, and left us with no place to go. So absolutely, we'd be interested in pursuing this.
Thank you. Ranking Member Carson, have any more questions? I want to thank you all for your testimony. Your comments have been helpful in today's discussion. If there are no further questions, I would ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, and unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered, I would like to thank again our witnesses again for your testimony today. If no other members have anything to add, this subcommittee stands adjourned.